My name is Suraya Afiff. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Anthropology, University of Indonesia. Before I begin my presentation, first of all, I would like to thank you, the organizer of the International Conference on Indonesian Culture, to invite me as one of the speakers. I'm honored to speak in this important meeting. And as requested by the conference organizer, my presentation will be related to the topic of the politics of ecology. And the title of my presentation is Capitalism, Environmental Change, and Community Struggle in Indonesia. And I base my talk on my long-term involvement on this topic. And first, through my involvement as an environmental activist at one of the major environmental groups in Indonesia. And then I continue to study this after I completed my PhD degree. Continue to research this and then to combine it with teaching at University of Indonesia. My presentation today is to want to address the underlying reason that driving the ecological change, ecological crisis, and the community, how the community responses to this crisis that they have experienced as we depicted in this slide. It is hard not to agree with Jademore that we are currently live in the era of capital. He disagrees with Anthropocene discourse. The term, from his perspective, indicate Anthropocene is the term to indicate the geological epoch that where human activities shape the biophysical environment in a significant way. For more, we could not assume all human activities that it's a main responsible that contribute to the Anthropocene. He pointed out capitalism as the main responsible in making significant ecological change and anthropogenic ecology crisis, such as in climate change. Capitalism, as Jademore argued, isn't simply about money, market, price, capital, or even economics. From more perspective, it is a system of knowledge, a system of knowing that informs practice. So what is the capitalism logic? The underlying logical framework in capitalism is the capitalism assumption about the separation of environment and human relation or society. This assumption informs practice either in terms of public policy or other human activities. More argue, capitalism logic is ecology without humans and human relation without ecologies. This separation, he said, is a fundamental to the capitalist accumulation, which is need to be based on cheap nature. As a result, according to Moore, human as well non-human life and biophysical nature has been devalued as mere an object for profit making. Now, in this talk, I would like to try to convey that we need to investigate the capitalism as a logic and practice in our attempt to understand and analyze and explore the major ecological change and disaster, as well as community response to the ecological crisis that they experience. I argue that capitalism as a system of thought, knowledge, and practice become the main foundation in the decision-making process that guiding our relationship with nature. It undermines. If we use this capitalism logic that separating nature and environment, it undermines and marginalizes other systems of thought, knowledge, and practices, which are not agree with capitalism framework. As a number of scholars argue that environmentalism issue not only a struggle over material resources, but also a struggle but also struggle over social construction of environmental knowledge and representation. In order to understand ecological transformation, we can't simply look to nature, but rather to social, historical, and political factors influencing relations between land user and their environment. Thus, my next attempt in this presentation is to trace the history of capitalism as a system of thought, as a socialization of production, as a practice that emerged and evolved in Indonesia, and what its influence and effect in the process of making environmental change and communities that also shape community struggle in Indonesia today. I have to emphasize that this process is actually complex, but since I don't have time for the sake of this presentation, I have to provide summary of this explanation of this process. And unfortunately, because of that, I have to tell it as a coherent story. In order to understand the process, we need to trace it back to colonial era. I will just point out a key historical juncture that shaped the way capitalism emerged as a dominant system of thought and also as a relation of production and a practice in Indonesia. The state, colonial and post-colonial one, has been an important player in this process. Therefore, this is the process we can call capitalism from above. There is a number of important processes occur in the colonial period that would also facilitate the foundation of capitalism of accumulation during the post-colonial Indonesia. In the colonial era, one of the main factor or the main influence that also shaped the post-colonial era is the agrarian law that was passed in 1870s. This law was an important mark for the rise of agrarian capitalist expansion in Indonesia. The core principle underlying this law is domain verklaring, which declared all unclaimed and forest land as a domain of the state. Under this law, the state classified land that were not used by the community or not claimed by the community or cannot be proved by community as a wasteland. And this wasteland then can be leased out to the private investor for 75 years. This agrarian law was the important legal basis for the colonial government to justify the state control over land and to facilitate the expansion of capitalist investment. In the colonial era, Java and Sumatra were the two major islands as the main factor for this private capitalism investment. In the post-colonial era of Indonesia, domain verklaring were replaced by the principle that the Indonesian state, on behalf of the whole people of Indonesia, is responsible for the control and regulation of the earth, water, air, natural resources of the nation to achieve the maximum prosperity of the people. Although it has a similar concept with the domain verklaring, the state control of the land, as it stipulated in the 1960s basic agrarian law or basic land law, become the basis of the post-colonial Indonesian state, in particularly since the Suharto New Order came to power as the basis for the government to expand capitalist agrarian production. Some critics of the recent controversial omnibus law has the tendency to adopt the domain verklaring concept. Now, whether it's true or not is beyond the scope of this presentation. But it's interesting to watch whether this is actually the case. There were two important forms of agrarian production system emerged throughout the colonial period that have shaped the expansion of agrarian capitalism in the post-colonial Indonesia. I will talk the first one before and then the next one. Form. The first form of agrarian production that emerged during colonial era was the corporate capitalism, capitalist plantation financed by multinational investors. These plantations were established for commercial commodities such as rubber, tobacco, sugar, tea, sisal, later on also palm oil. These plantations have a commodity that aim for export for global market. In 1920s, the Netherlands, India, which is now Indonesia, and the Malays, which is Malaysia, were the main exporters of rubber in the world. In the post-colonial era, interestingly, the two countries are continued as the world major producer of plantation crop. Only now, rubber is replaced by palm oil. In this slide, I just want to show, to make this reader to look how extensive that this system of East Coast, the plantations system in the East Coast of Sumatra. It shows that along with this plantation establishment is also large-scale deforestation take place in the history of Indonesia. This is the first deforestation occur in Indonesia. And in this slide, I just want to show that how colonial plantation occupy major land cover in some of the district. More than half percentage of that total land is actually under plantations, which is not even different from today's case. It's important to remember that the establishment of colonial private plantation often were possible through the facilitations of local chief and leader. This is an example in the North Sumatra, that the Delhi Sultan was one of the key figures in providing foreign investors to access land to establish plantations. As a return for helping these plantations to get access to land, Sultan and the local rulers in Delhi, North Sumatra, gain monetary benefit from corporation, beside, of course, state revenue. They have to give the state revenue. The interaction between indigenous rurals and capitalist investors also influence and justify Sultan and local chief territorial kings. That is as a result. For example, the Grand Sultan in land system was known after the arriving of foreign investors in North Sumatra, so that the Sultan now have a territorial claim of land. That not the case in the previous, before this happened, before colonial plantation came. The other aspect of the colonial plantation is also labor, because they need a lot of people that work for plantation. They have to brought labor from outside Indonesia or Netherlands, Indies, and also domestically, mostly from Java. And you can see how many people that brought in to eastern coast of Sumatra. And this change, as a result, democratic characters in this region change completely. The other effect, or the other influence, or in the other case, the other causes, that after the expansion of tobacco plantation in Delhi, for example, influence also new social grouping, new rules that determine who can access to what land. It creates a process of inclusion and exclusion as well, based on different ethnic and background. This process shaped agrarian conflict in North Sumatra until today. In this slide, I will mention the second process of the agrarian production system, which is associated with the state itself as a key player in the capitalist relation of production. This began with the establishment of political forest, what Nancy Peluso and Van der Kist call political forest, which is land that state declared as forest. And this has happened at the beginning in Java. The political forest has been instrumental in facilitating the emergence of scientific forestry management system in Java, as well as the establishment of state forest institutions. In the post-colonial era, the political forest is not reduced, but expand to cover even more larger area. Two-thirds at the beginning, two-thirds of the total land area in Indonesia covered under forests and the state forest. Today, the state forest reduced a little bit, only to 60% of the total land of Indonesia. Now, this state territorialization process continue with mapping the land or classify the land into four major classifications: production, protection, conservations, and conversion for agricultural purpose. The designation of the state claim become the key instrument for the post-colonial state to expanding the capital corporate investment and become the main of social inequality, marginalization, violent conflict between local communities and the corporations. And then the corporation get permit from the state and get political backup from the state most of the time. Again, due to time limit and space, throughout my presentation, I show as if the state as a coherent image. However, I must emphasize here that the state actors in day-to-day practice are not homogeneous in their interest and intention. However, it is interesting to make a reflection that we cannot deny that if you look what happened in our environment today in Indonesia, the capitalist relation of production, knowledge, and practices are continue as a dominant concept in the public decision and derive how government actually relation to the environment. This is the last slide because I have don't have time to explain and discuss thoroughly the community respond to the ecological change and crisis. Now, so far in various slides, I show that how capitalism actually emerged from above. People, either they're indigenous, local, farmer, fisher, or else, are of course are not a passive victim. Some of them oppose the process of capitalism from above. Some of them welcoming it as they see the opportunity to get involved. Or other modify the term. Thus, their struggle to gain access to and control over land and resources took various forms, used myriad of tactics, and oftentimes it happened behind the radar, behind the surface, and they cannot always appear in the news or mention in government or activist statistics. Some of this community are trying to refuse capitalism as a system of thought, as a system of practice that govern human relation with land or and other resources. One of these example is in my opinion, is Sedulur Samin communities who oppose the Kendeng Kars mining for cement factory in Central Java. They did not convince that capitalist proposal will that ask them to give up agriculture and join the crowd to be a worker or else will help them in a better position and prosperity. For them, adopting the capitalist assumption means to dissolve their identity. One of the new strategy is also involved in a co-production of knowledge, where they combine their local and scientific knowledge that then they use it as a campaign to protect the cars and the surrounding environment. However, as Tanya Lee keep remind us in her Lands and book, that capitalism is also embedded in social relation of production, might also emerge from below, as she brilliantly showed in her 20 years of work among the largest Sulawesi Tenggara. Her work poses a great challenge for social movement who campaign against capitalism as a social relation of production, as a system of knowledge, of knowing nature, as practice in relation with the environment. Now this one, because I don't have a time, I think I would eager to discuss this topic further and also encourage part of the future research and strategy to also focus on this issue, which is capitalism from below, capitalism as embedded in social relation of production within the community itself. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.